But I just remember we were down at Diamond Jim's on Hollywood Boulevard, and Vishnu John was, you know, they're chanting the old Hollywood melody, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And suddenly his eyes just got big and he said, Prabhupada. You know, and he hit the ground and we all turned around and there was Prabhupada in this little, I can't remember, like maybe a Ford Pinto or something, a small car. That's all I remember. Prabhupada was there making pranams. You know, I was thinking, God, you know, we're like mlechas or something. And here Prabhupada was so happy to see the devotees, you know, out on Harinam preaching, you know, preaching the holy name on such a degraded place. And Prabhupada was so happy. He was making pranams. We all just, right there on the street, we all just hit the deck, you know. Prabhupada was just so pleased to see us out there preaching. So that's the first memory that I ever have of Prabhupada. It's still there anyway.
I first saw Srila Prabhupada in 1969. I had had a little bit of association with the devotees before that, but I went to the temple in 1969, and Prabhupada, that was when the temple was on La Cienega Boulevard in Los Angeles. And Prabhupada came to the temple that afternoon to give a lecture. And I remember being really struck by the fact that here was a perfect person. At that time, of course, the perfection was all external in my eyes. I was always looking for a person who had perfect poise, perfect style. When Prabhupada got out of the car and stood up, I thought, here is, he's perfect. He's perfect. He's a perfect dresser. He's in the midst of all this turmoil, Sankirtan turmoil, he was just like aloof, I would suppose, but not aloof in terms of cold, but he was just like gliding through all this chaos, and he was perfectly self-centered. And I was so struck by that. He gave a lecture. I haven't the vaguest idea what the lecture was about, but you know, you get caught up in the enthusiasm and the... Then, after the lecture, he got down from his Vyasasan and he led us all in a line dancing around the temple room, and he'd stop in front of every picture. They had these big paintings, Jadharani's paintings on the wall, and he'd stop and put up his arms and just sway back and forth, and everyone, we were all in a line behind him, and we were all swaying and screaming and jumping, and he was just so ecstatic. He was so, it was just an extraordinary experience, you know, the most extraordinary experience, as we know now, that any person within the universe can have.
My very first letter, which was my initiation letter in 1970 in London, Srila Prabhupada acknowledged in my letter to him an appreciation for my senior God brothers and God sisters. And he said, "This is Vaishnava," in his reply to me. "This is very good, that you understand the importance of taking guidance from your senior God brothers and God sisters. Take guidance from them and go on with your devotional service, and Krishna will bless you." And that association with devotees and that receiving of guidance from senior Vaishnavas it's actually more important than chanting. Because the chanting, while it is our #1 principle of devotional service, unless it is backed up with association, which gives us the information and the understanding and the the working through of whatever problems we may have that get in the way of chanting, the chanting will go away. We'll stop chanting without association. We'll dry up. So actually association with the devotees of the Lord is the most important principle of devotional service.
Personally initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1971. It was a huge initiation. It went on all week. Many people were initiated. There's a tape even, one of the rare tapes of an initiation. It was quite a long tape. I think the archives has it. I have a copy. And many of us were initiated. In those days, many people were joining in Henry Street. And when Prabhupada came in 71, it was either May or June, or around then, summer, early summer, many people were initiated. So he told me personally, he said, "Your name is Pushkar," he said, and Pushkar is a sacred lake in India. He said, anyone who swims in that lake, he will become a devotee. You should bring people to that lake. So that's there. He said that. Of course I was thinking, what does it mean at the time? But I went there, and I went to Pushkar Lake in 74 when I got to India. Small lake, and it was hard to bring people into the lake. In fact, the one person I spoke to was some guy whose mother was swimming, and he didn't want to go in because he was an atheist. He didn't believe in any potency of the lake. But his mother was very pious. So, but I think Prabhupada meant it more in a broad sense of bringing people into Krishna consciousness.
I had come out to LA just for that purpose, to get initiated by Prabhupada, and as far as I know, that was the last fire sacrifice that Prabhupada did everything, where he sat there, chanted on the beads in front of everyone. I mean, it took hours because he chanted. It was 10 of us. It was myself, Jayatirtha, Krishnakanti, Dayanidhi, Chitralekha, and others. I can't. It was 10 of us. That's what I remember. And Prabhupada chanted. So 10 rounds he had to chant in front of us. And I can remember seeing Prabhupada chanting. I had those Tandy Leather Company beads, little white ones. They looked like a little string of pearls in Prabhupada's hands. And he was just had a special way of holding them like that and stretching them like this. And he was chanting on my beads. And I reached forward. He asked me first he asked me the 4 regular principles, and I said no, no meat eating, no illicit sex life, no gambling, and then my mind went blank, and I just froze, and then I couldn't think. And Prabhupada was waiting, and I completely frozen. I couldn't think anything, and somebody poked me from the side and said, "No drugs." I said, "Oh, no intoxication." And Prabhupada laughed, and he said, "Yes, no LSD." Then he asked me how many rounds, and he handed my beads and said, "So your name is Bandhu." Bandhu means friend of the humble.
In relation to my name, I remember a few years later when I was in Mayapur, and we only had the first guest house there, and Prabhupada would go for his morning walk, walking between the little levees or banks between the rice fields. And we were just leaving the back of the building, and Prabhupada said, "Bhavananda." And he said, "Do you know what Bhavananda means?" And Gargamuni Maharaj said, "Yes, it means one who's absorbed in the ecstasy of bhava." Prabhupada said, "No, that's Bhavananda. His name is Bhavananda." He said it means one who takes endless enjoyment in this material world. I should have taken warning then, I'll tell you. And I said, "Prabhupada?" He said, "Yes." He said, "But that is because bhava means birth in this world." And he said, "That is a devotee. A devotee takes endless enjoyment in this material world because it offers endless opportunities for preaching."
I thought he would appreciate if I showed a little humor, and so I made an announcement to, at the time it was in 72 or 73, here in New York, the New York University Krishna Yoga Club, and I made an announcement for the New York University student newspaper, kind of a cartoon that showed kind of this cool guy with his dark glasses on, And in the next frame, he was just completely laid out on the floor as swarms of students streamed over him with a sign flying saying, "Krishna Yoga Club opens today." And Srila Prabhupada sent me a letter saying, "I don't think you need to distract yourself for such cartoons." He said, "Our strength is our purity." And this kind of approach has made things seem less important and less serious than they really are. We don't need to go out of our way to attract public attention, to appeal to anyone on some other basis. Let our purity be our strength. And actually, to be chastised by the spiritual master is a great blessing. And that particular incident I've carried with me all these years. It's informed everything I've done ever since.
I did a painting of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta from a profile. It's a really grave picture with Sika in a loop. And I painted it, and I put Radha Krishna and the gopis behind him, and it was kind of the colors were kind of somber and whatever. So we hung it in Prabhupada's quarters, so I wasn't in there. We put it in, and after I left, Jadharani told me that he said, "So who has done that painting?" So Jadharani said, a new boy named Matthew. So Prabhupada, and it's funny because when I was working on it, I had a little trouble with the profile, with the nose, and Bhardraj actually touched it for maybe 5 minutes. So when Prabhupada saw the painting, and she said, "Matthew did it," I was Bhakta. So Prabhupada said, "Yes, Bhardraj has done." She said, no, Matthew has done." He said, "Bhardraj has done." So anyway, that was Prabhupada.
When Prabhupada came back to Los Angeles, must have been again in it was 1970. We rented a little house on Formosa Avenue off of Melrose Avenue there. And Karanda and I were fixing the place up, and we built an altar, and I was decorating the altar and put up a curtain. And I really wanted to see Prabhupada, but who was I think it was Gargamuni, said, no, you have to go in. Prabhupada's on his walk. We want you in there, do your business on the altar, set it all up. So when he comes back, everything is ready and you're not there, right? I kept saying to Karanda, I said, geez, I'd really like to see Prabhupada. And Karanda said, no, he said, we have to do what they say, just do our business and get out. And bingo, Prabhupada walked in the door. So Krishna satisfied my desire, fortunately. And he said, oh, very nice. He looked at the altar and he loved it. He said, you have done this? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. He said, well, he said, you see the difference. He said, you are designing, you can design a disco and go to hell. Or you can design Krishna's temple and altar and go to Vaikuntha. All right. And then we left. So I was happy.
So I joined in Boulder where, Bhavananda had gone there with Harinama to open the temple. So those were the days, we had, polyester and Dakra and dhotis, but since, he wasn't the temple president there, but he was, something there. So I didn't have just an ordinary piece of Dakron cloth, it was real shiny. So that real shiny meant that it was very slippery also. So, and those are the days we didn't tie that little knot, it was just tucked in. And I was there jumping up and down, and all of a sudden I felt something go zoop. It didn't actually fall off, but I was so ecstatic. We were there in front of Prabhupada, and I just grabbed my dhoti and was just jumping up and down in front of Prabhupada.
He would take his massage in the afternoon, and he loved to have someone read to him during his massage. In fact, I remember one time reading Chaitanya Charitamrita during his massage, and it was one of those chapters in CC that describes if you take the southern extension of the such and such railroad and get off at such and such Pur, and then take the bus for 3 minutes and then walk 2 blocks left, you'll come to a stone, and behind that stone is a tree, And that tree is where this and that and the other thing happened, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was doing it. It took my breath away, and I said, Srila Prabhupada, there's such incredible detail. And he looked at me and smiled. He said, yes, they will have to accept that this movement is authorized, that it is bona fide. That's why I've put so much detail here. They think we're some kind of cult. This will prove to them otherwise.
I was sitting next to Srila Prabhupada when we first got the Bhagavatams from Dina hardbacks, and he opened the book, looking through it, looking at the pictures, and he said, I think the painters are the best book distributors. Something you don't forget. And later on, the next year, we got the Macmillan Gita, which was not bound so well or printed as well, and Srila Prabhupada noticed it right away. So Jayadurta was saying something, this and that Macmillan had said this and that, why they couldn't make it so good or whatever. And Prabhupada gave the example. He said, he compared it to the Japanese and said the Japanese was much superior to Dinapan. He said, yes, they're giving so many excuses. He said, just like the man was dancing and falling, he could not dance, and he's saying, yes, there's a hill there. There's no hill, but he's saying there's a hill. He said, and they're simply after money. Put his hands up like that, fingers. He said, they're simply after money.
In the beginning, they'd pick 2 or 3 devotees from the temple in L.A. who could go walk behind Prabhupada on the morning walk. Usually not very much was said. However, he did do one thing, and this was the first time when he had that little house in Beverly Hills. We drove him up to below Sunset, between Santa Monica and Sunset in Beverly Hills, where all those huge houses and, huge cars. Prabhupada would walk down the palm-lined streets. And I was walking right behind him. And of course, my eye was attracted to all these, magnificent mansions and, gorgeous gardens. And I was being more attracted to that than to Prabhupada. And at one point, Prabhupada coughed. Just as I was thinking that, he coughed and he just turned and he spit right on the lawn of one of those big houses with such disdain, So I learned that lesson.
Another time, since we're here in Los Angeles, I was remembering how one time Prabhupada, that was when the temple room was in where the Fate Museum is now. And so Prabhupada used to come in the back door and then walk up to pay obeisances to the deities and everything, and then sit down at his Vyasasan. So Prabhupada came in the back door, and as soon as he came in, he cocked his head back, like you've seen how Prabhupada does, And he said, what is there in Krishna's eye? And all I know is from that back door to where because we only had the little deities that time. From that back door, I can't even see if Krishna has an eye, what to speak of see what's in Krishna's eye. And Prabhupada said, what is that in Krishna's eye? And even the pujaris who were right up there, it took them 2 minutes. They were just looking all around, trying to figure out. And they finally found some piece of the tilak. When they had put the tilak on, a little splinter of tilak had fallen down in Krishna's eye. And we were all totally shocked.
It wasn't a morning walk, it was a morning sit out back at Bhaktivedanta Manor. We would just come out sometimes in the morning or early afternoon and we'd sit around in a circle and we'd chant japa, and sometimes we'd ask a question or sometimes he'd ask us something. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, there are 2 people equally unqualified for devotional service. One becomes a devotee and the other doesn't. What makes the difference? He shot me a look. He said, don't try to find some formula for causeless mercy. He says, it's causeless. He says, ultimately it's up to the mercy giver. So he was such a mercy giver that he never asked us to fill out any questionnaires. He never asked, what's your history, what's your background, what have you done good, what have you done bad. there was never any such auditioning for becoming his disciple. He said, whatever you've done before, that's behind you. Now, from this point on, follow the rules and regulations. And that's really that should be our disposition toward people in Krishna consciousness. There should be such an effort to bend over backwards to anyone who's trying to serve Krishna. What to speak of people who may, for one reason or another, have fallen away from the movement. We have to, as Vaishnavas, we need to see what their service has been and find a way to encourage them and to bring them back by demonstrating to them the same kind of love and affection and concern that Srila Prabhupada showed us.
So in Mayapur, when I finally went, Prabhupada wanted us to decorate the doors, and I was doing a mural in the temple room of Panchatattva next to where the old temple room was in Mayapur. So on one occasion, when I was painting a door, it was Krishna Balaram jumping off the big mountain from Krishna. I was just copying it on the door. They're still there. I actually varnished them in '94, finally, after they half wore off. So Prabhupada walked around. He was walking. If you know Mayapur, there was no one around, just Prabhupada and me. I was painting on a door. As you come up the steps to the second floor, on the left, if you make a left, I was painting one of those doors, like I think the second door down on your left, on Prabhupada's side of the veranda. So he was heading around the opposite side, his side, and then coming to the front and around, kind of, circumambulating. So he came to me, and I was up on a box or a chair painting, and he stopped. He was changing job, and he stopped and said, "How long this has taken you?" And I felt really ridiculous because I immediately felt like I should have done this in 1/10 the time. I said, "Prabhupada, it's taken a week. I'm very slow." So he said, "Slowly but surely." He just kept walking, very cool and relaxed. Another time, I did a big picture of Prabhupada. It's still there in Mayapur, and when he saw it, he liked that, and I came in, and he was saying, "Yes, so you're an expert. You should simply paint the cyclic succession, and you'll go back to Godhead." And he said, another time, I had done a picture, it's still there, of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati sitting in a carved wooden chair. And somehow he liked that painting. And I believe it was 75. Anyway, everyone had gone to see Prabhupada. It was very crowded, all the sannyasis and everything. So I didn't bother to try to go in. But later, after they dispersed, they told me, "Oh, Prabhupada really liked your painting. He wants to see you." So I was thinking, well, I just can't walk in there. So I didn't think about it. And then maybe at the end of the day or next day, someone said, "Prabhupada wants to see you, and you and Bhardraj should come in." So we went in there, just me and Bhardraj. Unfortunately, there was nobody taping or anything, but we were in there for like 40, 45 minutes, and he's just talking about painting the whole time, art. And some of the things I remember, especially he mentioned this painting we have in New Dwarka that's above, in the deities, right above the deities. Apparently Prabhupada wasn't so pleased with it, because Bhardraj and Prabhupada were discussing whether or not Western artists could do the wall, work on the wall, or bringing Indians to America to do other things. And he said, "Yes, but you have spent so much money to bring that man. He has done that painting above the above the deities." And he said, "We are not interested in so much minuteness." Couldn't forget it. He said, "We are not interested in so much minuteness." And that's the way he described that painting. Then he said, "If a child paints Krishna, no one criticizes, because there's bhava, meaning feeling, not like Mahabhava, but bhava meaning feeling." He said, just like Jadharani, and he said, in the beginning she was not very expert. And then he put his finger up and he said, "And still." Always painting big hairs, because there were a few paintings she did that he didn't like with long hair. He said, women, they like this big hair and beard. He said, he wasn't so much into that. And he said, when he was talking about our men doing work, he said, our men cannot do work in India. He said, because there was one other devotee, Anakadundabi, and he would get up very early, and we used to do night guard, and Prabhupada would see him, and he'd be kind of nodding off sometimes while he was painting, and Prabhupada imitated him. He He said, 3 hours for one line, and he went like that. Probably went like that. And then finally at the end, he asked me, he said, so you have done this painting of my Guru Maharaj? So I immediately felt like, below zero, like I couldn't take, probably had a way of making you feel like you just couldn't take credit for anything. You can immediately understand that you're an instrument, because just by his potency, if he said, so you have done, you think, gee, did I do that? You'd actually have to ask yourself. I just shrugged my shoulders. I said, yeah. So he looked at Bardroj and he said, Bardroj, I think he is even more expert painter than you, which was a way of encouraging and joking with people. It was very nice.
He said, I have so many palaces all over the world that I can stay in. He said, practically speaking, there's no difference between me and the Goswamis in terms of our lifestyle. He said, they stayed under a different tree every night. I stay in a different palace every night. They wrote, I write. He said, originally, I did not want to come here. He said, Krishna, not to America, but to this world. He said, Krishna asked, I want you to write those books. Come down and write those books. And I said, I don't want to come to that. I don't want to go to that material world. And he said, Krishna said, don't you worry, I'll take care of everything. You write those books. That was the first and only time that I've ever heard or read, I might be wrong, where Prabhupada actually spoke about Krishna speaking to him and how he didn't want to go. And he made that face, his upper lip kind of, I did not want to go to that world. He said, I will take care of everything. You just come down and write those books. The atmosphere when he said that, it was just, it was like nothing I've ever experienced, ever.
One time, this was, I can't remember what year, but now we were into where the temple room is now, and Prabhupada was sitting in that big Vyasa-san there. And he gave a lecture, and at the end of the lecture, Prabhupada said, so if you will just follow these 4 regulative principles and chant 16 rounds, then you will go back to home, back to Godhead. I guarantee it. And Prabhupada paused, and he just sort of looked around at all of us. And then again he said, I guarantee it.
And I remember in the early days, before ever meeting Srila Prabhupada, how vitally instructive and enlightening his letters were. And in one letter that came to us at Bury Place in 1970, it must have been, there was this admonition. I think it was in a letter to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He was asking, what is more important, Sankirtan, rounds, devotional service, our health? And Srila Prabhupada's answer was, the highest principle is to save yourself.
Also, there was a time in Calcutta when anyone who was around in those days knows it wasn't that easy to get to see Srila Prabhupada. There were some heavy sannyasis, and they used to kind of guard him, and more or less, you were just kind of a prop or an extra in the movie, and they were kind of the stars. So luckily one time, in I think it was September of '74, all the powers that be were not in the Calcutta temple. And I'm just sitting, minding my own business on the balcony, the veranda of Calcutta temple, outside Prabhupada's room. And it was only a curtain. There was no door. Suddenly, Shruti Kirti appeared on our side of the curtain, and he said, hey, Prabhupada's just sitting in there if anybody wants to come in. So I, first I thought, whoa. But then I realized that Chutananda was there, so I didn't feel so weird going in alone. Chutananda went in with me. And I remember that whole time was when Hansaduta was doing something strange, collecting money, and they were complaining to Prabhupada, Gargamuni and Chutananda, because it was Chutananda's record and he was selling it and keeping the money. So they were constantly badgering Prabhupada. He was very tolerant and didn't say anything. So as soon as we came in, the first thing that Chutananda said, again, he said, Prabhupada, it seems like although the Japanese and Germans lost World War II, they've taken over ISKCON. And I'm thinking, what's this guy talking to Prabhupada about? So Prabhupada looked at him quizzically like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, Hansaduta, he's a German, and Balamadhan's wife's Japanese, and they're just they're destroying, the movement or something. So Prabhupada just said, why are you so concerned what this man does, that man does? He said, your relation is with the Guru. He said, it doesn't matter what this man does. He said, and he quoted, Yasha Devi Parabhaktir Yata Devi Tata Guru. If you have faith in the Guru, then everything will be revealed to you. Faith in the Vedas and the Guru. So it's a very, very instructive, because, it's something you just can't forget. Because sometimes we hear so many excuses, this man did this to me, and that man did that. Probably wouldn't take that. That doesn't stand up. Probably doesn't acknowledge that. There is friction, it's true, you can't ignore it. But ultimately it's up to us, and the relation is with the Guru, even though there may be so many failures, even caused by so-called God brothers or something. But they're just temporary setbacks. It really hasn't anything to do with your real Krishna consciousness.
I once said to him, Prabhupada, I said, I am so lusty. I said, my eyes go everywhere. He said, oh, that means you are going to go blind. I said, blind to material nature, I hope, Prabhupada. He said, no, blind. Oh, dear.
So we were walking down the beach, and so Dr. Judah said, Prabhupada, what do you do about the question of lust? And Prabhupada stopped, and he dug his cane in the sand. He said, unless you become Krishna conscious, there's no solution. He said, you have to become Krishna conscious. Otherwise, there's no solution to this lust. And then he walked on, and again he repeated. He said, if you become Krishna conscious, then this question of lust is solved. Otherwise, you cannot solve it any other way. Which is like Prabhupada was saying, that you can do so many things. You can cut down eating your sweets, or you can, do so many things, have, defense mechanisms like young brahmacharis that women are snakes and this and that. He said, but unless you become Krishna conscious, you just go on with your service, become Krishna conscious, and you can overcome this.
There was a dance performance in London. I'm not sure if it was in London. Jamuna told me this story. And they were watching this woman do a Bharatanatyam dance. And Srila Prabhupada looked at Jamuna and said, she's very beautiful, isn't she? Jamuna was horrified. No. Srila Prabhupada said, oh, you don't like her? So I asked him one time about dance and poetry. And I said, what do you think about all of these artistic performances, Srila Prabhupada, these cultural performances of Bharatanatyam dance, of Krishna and the gopis? And is it spiritual? He thought for a moment, and he said, it is spiritually inspiring in the moment. But the difference between that and the chanting of Hare Krishna is that the inspiration that you derive from chanting, that is permanent.
Once I remember in Mayapur that there was a play with all men. I don't remember the play exactly. I'm sure you could find out from Lokamangala or Lloyd Daksha. Anyway, at the end of the play, Prabhupada said, yes, this is how a play should be, only men, no women. He said, just like, and he told the story, he said, Lord Chaitanya was running, he heard that Devi singing, and he ran in thorn bushes, and Govinda caught him because he was running toward a woman. He didn't know, he was just thinking of Krishna. And so then he said, yes, if I'd have touched a woman, I would have died. Lord Chaitanya told Govinda, you have saved me. So he said, plays should just be with men. Because the day before, there'd been a play with women, and Prabhupada seemed to appreciate it, but then he gave this other little lila instruction. One time, Gargamuni had arranged the Javeri sisters. They were very well-known Manipuri dancers, the most well-known, in '75, and they started putting their dance on in front of the deities, Radha Madhava, in Mayapur. And Prabhupada was sitting, and there was Panchadevita and Vishnu Jan. I don't know if there were any other swamis, but definitely they were there. I remember them looking very embarrassed. They didn't know whether to look at I mean, these women had big hoops for skirts. It's not like they were doing any kind of, but they were women. And a sannyasi is not supposed to see women dancing. Anyway, so they were looking at Prabhupada and feeling a little embarrassed. And Prabhupada, you couldn't tell, Prabhupada, because the deities were there, and he was looking at the deities. I mean, but just after their little intermission, Prabhupada got up and left. And the sannyasis immediately felt relieved,
When we flew in 1972 from Nairobi to Bombay, Shyamasundar Prabhu had forgotten to include Prabhupada's yellow fever card in his passport. So when we arrived at Bombay airport, they put Prabhupada in quarantine, right? At some like little hospital out in the airport. So I stayed with him. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, and it was a lovely building with a big, big veranda and nice chairs and everything, and a big screened-in veranda. And Prabhupada would, pace up and down there and chant in the middle of the night. And then I was sleeping in the room next to him, and I heard, Bhavananda, Bhavananda. I got up and right there, I was half asleep. Prabhupada was furious. He had been chanting, and he decided he wanted to go out into the little garden that they had in front of this hospital. We were the only ones in the building. But it was all mosquito netted in, the whole. So he went to go out and a guard stopped him. They wouldn't let him out because their fear was, a mosquito will bite him, and the mosquito will pick up the yellow fever if he has it and spread it around. So they wouldn't let him go out. He was so angry. He said, he said, do something, do something. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and what could I do anyway, I was just a little pipsqueak. So I just let him yell at me because he was so angry. Do something. They have trapped me here. He said, I have never been able to be confined. He said, I cannot stand to be confined. He said, here I am. It's like a bird in a golden cage. He said, it's a lovely building, but I can't go outside. He said, do something. Do something. Very upsetting when he says something like that, and you know that there's really nothing you can do.
And I remember one time, must have been 1970, we came out for Rath Yatra, but we knew that Prabhupada was in LA, so we drove out from Boulder and we came to LA first. And that was the very beginning when Prabhupada started the Govinda prayers. Before that, that wasn't, that's taken for granted now. In the very beginning of the movement, we didn't have Govinda prayers. So it was either like the second or maybe the third day that they were playing Jamuna's tape of the Govinda prayers. So Prabhupada came in, and they played the tape, and he paid his obeisance, he took the charnam, and they sat down on the Vyasasan. And he was singing along and just sort of, not clapping his hands, but just, like this. And suddenly we saw tears were just gliding down Prabhupada's cheeks. And we were all just like feeling, who are we to be present in the presence of, Prabhupada experiencing these ecstatic symptoms, just like one of the, lift up one of those old linoleum tiles, and crawl under, we just felt like so low. What are we doing here, And then Prabhupada suddenly, he just, big sniff, and he wiped his face like that, and then he just started chanting the Isopanishad mantras, because those days he was teaching, And he just started just like always thought it was like a sea captain, he would just sit there. Om Purnam Adaha Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Evavashishyate. This very deep, rich voice, it just sounded like, to me it reminded me like a sea captain. I remember those were, every day he would teach us another verse, and we would chant all the way up to that verse, and then he would teach us another verse the next day.
Pradyumna and I went to UNESCO in an attempt to get Srila Prabhupada's books included in the UNESCO Representative Library of World Literature. To be accepted into the UNESCO library meant being able to print the UNESCO seal on the inside of the publication, and it meant a certain number of books sold to libraries internationally. Well, the man was quite friendly at the office there, and as a gift in return for receiving the set of Srila Prabhupada's books, he handed us a copy of a translation of poems by Chandidasa and Vidyapati. Well, we went back to the suburban house, temple, where Srila Prabhupada was staying at that time, and I gave the book to Srila Prabhupada, and then left the room. About an hour later, Yogesvara come running in. Where did you get this book? So I explained. He said, these poets write for the Paramahamsas. They were contemporaries of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and they write for a very elevated class of devotee. He said, listen to this. And he read the following poem by Chandidas. Harshness at home hurts me like a burn. How long can I bear to be a girl in another's power? It is the sickness of love that has been my disease, and now it is the cure that kills me. He said, now that cure is Krishna. This is a married woman in this poem talking about her love for Krishna. Now we are condemning illicit sex. If we were to publish such poetry, people will condemn us as hypocrites. So we must be very careful. And then he gave the following story. He said that his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, once wanted to publish a similar book of poems by Chandidas. He went to his father, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, asked permission. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, no, I cannot allow you to do that. No one will understand. Again, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta returned to his father and asked, can I not publish these poems? Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur again denied him permission. And a third time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta returned to him, begging, please allow me to publish these poems. All right, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur told him, you can publish one copy for yourself. And Srila Prabhupada looked at me and said, because where are the great souls today who can understand such exalted poetry? And I turned to him and said, there is only you, Srila Prabhupada. He waved me off. I may not be so great. But Srila Prabhupada, I thought you told us that we're supposed to be following the footsteps of the gopis. Well, that's very nice, he said, to desire like that. But you have to be completely free of all material contamination, completely detached from the material world. Until then, you should read the books. Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Bhagavat. About an hour later, I hear, Yogesvara. I come into his room, and his servant is giving him a massage, and Srila Prabhupada is there, and he has the book of poetry. He's kind of like moving around a little bit with the massage, the motion of the massage, and he has the book in front of him. He's there in his gamcha. He says, listen to this. if you love me, wrap your legs around me. Well, I offered my obeisances and backed out of the room backwards. I didn't know what to do with that. So sometimes he would just kind of like throw you a little zinger just to see how you respond.
I was at one historical walk in Mayapur when Prabhupada suddenly announced, there was only one building, so we were walking, and he said, so there should be a wall here, and there should be a lake here, a pukor, which we have now, and the wall. There should be rooms on the wall, and then here there should be a very large prasadam pavilion. And I was totally bewildered. What is he talking about? I mean, one of the things I used to enjoy in Mayapur was looking out and feeling like I could have been in Lord Chaitanya's time, because there was no modern building at all. It could have been the 10th century or the 1st century. You only could see the Gaudiya Math temples. That's it. So kind of like I was thinking, wow. And within 2 months, a little more than 2 or 3 months, all that stuff was there. The Prabhupada's potency. They had 24-hour shifts just working and building. And Prabhupada was saying how the Bengalis could live in the wall. They could come from the village and they could live in there. And previously I was always complaining to the Bhavananda and Jayapataka, so many outsiders would walk on our property and there were so many dogs. But the first thing I remember Prabhupada said, why are these outsiders walking on our property? Our men have spent so much money to build this. Why any outsiders should walk on this property? There should be walls around. But I didn't expect such a dramatic turn of events. Actually, Bhavananda looked at me from the side because he had this attitude that it was Mayapur's spiritual world, that everybody walk on it, and he didn't like the idea of me complaining. But he looked at me with like a slight smile afterward. First thing Prabhupada said when he went out on the walk was why they're walking on our property. Then he started with talking about the walls and all that.
I remember I planted 100 rose bushes, or maybe it was 200, at Mayapur. And Guru Kripa and Jasodanandana and Gargamuni, they all came. It was just before the festival. They came from Japan, and they were commenting, God, what has he done? He's planted some rose bushes, right? The next day, Prabhupada came. He was ecstatic. He walked from the front gate down, we had put in the road by then, down the road to the guest house. And I had planted a lot of flowers and those 100 rose bushes. And Prabhupada was walking around the veranda on his floor. And he was standing there looking out over the campus, he would call it. He said, this is your success. He said, when I'm able to look out from this balcony and everywhere I look I see flowers, he said, that is your success. I said, gee, some devotees were like criticizing me because I'm planting. He said, no, he said, you must have flowers. He said, in Goloka, every tree, every plant, everything has flowers on it. That's why I used to object to some of the paintings in the Bhagavatams, where they have like English forest scenes. It's supposed to be Goloka. But I would say to them, there are no flowers on the trees. I said, in Goloka, there's flowers all the time. I said, Prabhupada said that.
Somehow or other, whenever I came down to LA, I'd always make sure that I was sitting right at the foot of Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa-san. So one day Prabhupada came in, he sat down in his Vyasa-san, and I was sitting right there, and Prabhupada looked rather concerned, and he pointed his finger toward me. And I couldn't figure out what was, and I looked down, I thought, God, maybe my dhoti's open, or, what's wrong, and I looked, and I couldn't see anything. And then I looked back up, and Prabhupada nodded his head like everything was okay, and I saw my hands were resting on my knees, sort of like in yogi position. So I just froze in that position. Now everything's all right. Whatever was wrong is all right now. So I was just sitting there, and Prabhupada was giving his lecture. And in the middle of his lecture, whatever it was that was stirring Prabhupada started again, which was that I was wobbling my knee like this, like we sometimes used to do. So all of a sudden, in the middle of his lecture, Prabhupada stopped and he pointed at me and said, "Don't do that." Somewhere I have to search through all the tapes and find it, but it was when he said, "Don't do that." Then I stopped,
I decided I would go out on the balconies of the guest house in Vrindavan and paint trees, landscapes. And I wasn't really thinking of Krishna specifically. But after I did the trees, I decided Krishna has to be here. So I put him in as an afterthought. And I put some boys in. So then I thought the painting was okay. I wanted to show it to Prabhupada. So I finally got an appointment with Prabhupada. I brought the painting in up. It was like on a balcony that faced the alleyway there. There's a few balconies up in Prabhupada's quarters. And he looked at it for quite a while, and I was starting to get really nervous. He's looking and he's looking. Finally he said, "What is the idea?" And I started to feel real dumb. And I couldn't say anything. I just said, "Well, Prabhupada, Krishna is playing his flute on the banks of Yamuna, and there's some boys." And he said, "What is the idea again?" He said to me. I said, "Oh, man." I said, Krishna's pastimes are, Krishna's unlimited, like that. He said, "Yes, Krishna is unlimited, but you are limited. Stick to the book." And he asked me what verse it was even before. He said, "What verse is it?" And I was like, I'd memorized hundreds of verses, and I couldn't say anything. I said, "Well, there's some descriptions." Somehow or other, he didn't like that painting. There's no way around it. He said, "Stick to the book." And so I just wanted to see, I knew I'd been sentenced, but I didn't know for how long. So I said, can this picture ever be used for books, just to see how much he hated it? He just he didn't say never, he just kind of a non-committal.
I was a photographer for BTG for a while, and in London at Bhaktivedanta Manor on a morning walk, I ran ahead with my camera and sprang up the side of an embankment to get a good angle, and I slid right down on my butt. Prabhupada walked by, looked down at me and said, "Don't take unnecessary risks." Kept on walking.
It was so hot. It was unbelievable, and he had called all the devotees, but in the meantime, he had sent them all back. So it was very quiet in Vrindavan, and it was very hot, and I had like a heat stroke attack. And I don't know why. I didn't know why then. I was on the plane flying. I just decided to leave and go back to Mayapur. Right? So Prabhupada said, "All right, if that's what you want to do, who will do your service here?" And we said, "Oh, Shatadana." He said, "All right, that's fine." So I'm on the plane going back to mine. I said, "Why? What is wrong with me? Why did I leave? Why did I leave?" It was like perfection, the perfection of life, to be able to serve the lotus feet of Prabhupada in Vrindavan, and it was so intimate, so close. Why did I leave? I got to Calcutta, drove out to Mayapur. I think that was like the 7th of July. And on the 8th of July, I was sitting in the garden, and suddenly there was this huge brouhaha, people running, "Oh, the Muslims have attacked," blah, blah. And there was huge amounts of people, and I shot them. We were arrested. I was in jail for like 3 weeks, and I was a mess because I thought, "Oh God, I've destroyed Prabhupada's entire preaching mission in India," right? So at one of the courtroom hearings where you stand in the dock and there were thousands of people in the middle of Navadvip. Oh God, what a nightmare. Jai Pataka kind of inched his way over to the dock that we were standing in. And he said, "How are you?" I said, "Oh, holding up." Actually, I had a nervous breakdown, one of my many. And He said, well, he said, Prabhupada said you did the right thing. What a relief. He said, Prabhupada said you did the right thing. You were protecting the ashram and protecting the deity. He said you did absolutely the right thing. He also said they were coming to find the old man. When he heard about it all, he told them up in Vrindavan. He said they were looking for because when the police came, they kind of ran right by us and went running throughout the whole guest house looking for Prabhupada. Of course, he wasn't there. He said they were looking for the old man, and they took Bhavananda instead. He was arrested in my place. Nice. That was nice.
Once coming up the steps in Mayapur, just at dusk, or just past dusk, it was generally nothing, it was quiet up there, second floor of the Lotus building. But then I came up, I was on my way up to the next floor, Brahmachari quarters, but I noticed there was a flurry, there was something going on, so I started walking towards Prabhupada's room, and I see there's Prabhupada leaning on the balcony, like that, at the end, very end. And I paid obeisances, and I got a little closer, and someone started telling me, oh, there's a snake. Prabhupada saw a snake. And I think Japataka told the story, but from my angle, my perception, was I just stood there. I didn't know what was going on, but the snake, the snake, it was like kind of scary. Cobras, there were other snakes, poisonous snakes. And they had flashlights, and they were looking here and there, and then I was kind of real close to Prabhupada, and I wasn't looking for anything. They were all running around. So after a couple minutes, Prabhupada was leaning, and he just said, so many men for one snake? It's like they all stopped in the tracks. They felt a little embarrassed, like they were overly concerned. Suddenly Prabhupada exhibited this, his amazing detachment. He said, so many men for one snake? So, and Pradyumna was particularly disturbed because he lived on the floor with Prabhupada, or he was just like that. And I remember him saying, well, where am I going to sleep? The snake could come and get us at night. Maybe I'm going to sleep upstairs or on a shelf. Big shelves, but it's kind of weird, sleeping on a shelf. So I didn't think about it. And then the next morning, I got to Prabhupada's room just as he was going to go on his walk. The door opened, and Prabhupada was standing there, and the sun was glinting off his eye. And he said, and I'd forgotten all about the snake. The first thing Prabhupada said was, anyone was bit by the snake? He had a little slight wry smile on his face. Then he walked to the steps, just stopped before going down the steps. And he said, Pradyumna has fled? And to me it was so funny because I had a vision of Pradyumna running down the dirt road toward the front of the property with a huge trunk of books. I mean, in other words, for Pradyumna to flee, because Prabhupada was always making fun of him because he had trunks of books everywhere he went. But that was I thought it was real funny the way Prabhupada said it. And then again, these were the Kunti prayers in the Bhagavatam class, so still you can hear it on the tape. I don't remember the exact verse, but then he got to a point where he said that we're feeling very safe in our 4-story marble building, but he said, but the snake is there. And what is the snake? The snake is death. So that's an example of Prabhupada really utilizing.
So I think it must have been 1975 when the opening of Krishna Balaram temple was there. And every day Prabhupada used to go down, they unfortunately still call it Chatikara Road, but it's now legally the Bhaktivedanta Swami Marg. So we would all walk with Prabhupada. So one day Prabhupada was walking down, and he was just so heavily preaching against abortion and birth control. He was just going on talking about how nasty this abortion is, this Kali Yuga. And he gave the example, he said, just like if I purchase an apartment and I go there to take possession and you stop me, that is illegal. You will be arrested if I go to the police. Or if I'm living in the apartment and you come to kick me out, it is illegal. You will be arrested. Like that. So that soul, he's purchased that womb, that's his apartment. If you stop him to come, that is illegal. If he's inside and you kick him out, that is illegal. And he just went on saying about, you will go from womb to womb and you will never see the light of day. He was just preaching so heavily against abortion. And on the way back, he was a little quiet. And there was one Indian man there, and he suddenly said, "Oh, Prabhupada, I read today that this Guru Maharaj Ji, his mother has denounced him." You know, and we all laughed. And Prabhupada said, "What is that?" He said, "This Guru Maharaj Ji, she's come in the papers and she's saying this guy is a bogus fellow and she's denounced him." And Prabhupada laughed and everyone laughed, and we walked a few more steps, and that Indian man said, "Yes, practically she has finished him." And Prabhupada stopped and he dug his cane into the street and he looked at all of us and he said, "She should have finished him in the womb."
There was a young man who was discovered stealing checks out of the mail in Bombay in the early days. And the devotees captured him finally and brought him to Srila Prabhupada. And we found out why the bank is not getting the checks, Srila Prabhupada. We caught the culprit. What should we do with him? Oh, Srila Prabhupada says, there's only one thing to do. Forgive him. But if someone was a repeat offender, then Srila Prabhupada asked them to leave the temple. Because then they're just compounding the offenses.
He was taking his morning walk on the road at Mayapur, and he walked up to like the Jog pit and then would walk back. When we came back to go into the temple, you know, through the gate, Prabhupada decided he wanted to go to the Ganga. So there was that steep embankment, and then you go to those fields. So, you know, it was fairly steep, and I got down on the side of the bank and put my arm up, and Prabhupada, you know, was leaning on my arm, and I, excuse me, helped him down the bank. Then he pushed my hand away, like very abruptly. And I was like a little shocked. And Prabhupada said, "That is the Mayavadi." He said, they take your help and then push you away. He said, you take the help of the Guru and then you reject the Guru to become God. He said, that is the Mayavadi. So it's simply not even nice to be a Mayavadi, is what I understood. You know, they have no concept even of manners, you know, on a transcendental level. Take your help and then push you away. Yeah.
Another time, I don't know if it's the same walk, Jayapataka informed him that Gaur Govinda Swami was teaching Bengali to devotees. So then Prabhupada said, "Why Bengali?" So Jayapataka was kind of shocked. He thought, this is great. Finally, some of these Western, Jayapataka knew Bengali, but a lot of people didn't. You know, so he said, "Well, we're in Bengal, Prabhupada. Why can't we learn Bengali?" And Prabhupada said, "They should learn Hindi. It's better." He said, "We do not care for Bengal. In Hindi, everyone speaks Hindi." You know, he was pushing for Hindi to be learned. Prabhupada really wanted us to learn the language. It's much more effective if you're there and you can speak the language.
People had different ideas about what a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada was meant for. Some people thought it was meant for establishing their position as one of the inner circle, so that they'd always jump in there early, making sure that they were the first ones out the door of the van or the first ones out the door of the temple, so that they'd be right next to Srila Prabhupada. Usually he would do them one better, either by turning around and going the opposite direction, so the ones who were in the back became the ones in the front, or sometimes there was one disciple in Paris who was always asking Prabhupada. He had this kind of a strange, like, crunched up kind of voice and in a French accent. He was listening, Srila Prabhupada, so Lord Shiva, it says in the Shiva Purana here. And Srila Prabhupada just looked at him and said, "Don't agitate your mind," and kept walking. Other people took the morning walk as an opportunity for engaging in polemic, a debate. And that was one of the favorite things we used to do on morning walks with Srila Prabhupada. Was he would throw out a challenge to us, or we would throw a challenge out to him, and there would be a discussion that would ensue. And sometimes, because he was a master of parry, Srila Prabhupada was a master of the quick riposte. Well, I think sex is spiritual. What do you say to that? Oh, that's a dog philosophy. Are you a dog? I understand you're Allen Ginsberg's guru. I am nobody's guru. I am everyone's servant. He would have some, he'd be able to come back very quickly like that. And sometimes he would walk and then he would stop. If there was some very particular important point. Some of the questions I asked him on morning walks in Paris. Srila Prabhupada, this Krishna consciousness movement seems so wonderful. Is it happening on other planets as well? Why not? Krishna is everywhere, therefore his movement is everywhere. Or another time, Srila Prabhupada, sometimes the devotees ask me, they express some discomfort over the fact that they don't get to see you very much. You're always traveling, and they don't know what their personal relationship is with you. What do you answer them? Well, I tell them that they shouldn't feel that way. You've invested yourself personally into all of your books. And if they read the books, they can experience your association. He said, you should first ask them if they're chanting their 16 rounds. He said, unless someone follows the basic principles, where is there any question of entering into a deeper relationship?
Prabhupada repeatedly told me and others that the big Mayapur Chandradoya Mandir, that's a story. The name of Mayapur Chandradoya Mandir, it was in Calcutta, and Jai Patak and I were in the room, and Prabhupada, he was trying to decide whether it should be called Mayapur Chandra Udaya or Chaitanya Chandradoya Mandir. He said, what do you think? So I said Mayapur Chandradoya. I said, I love that name. I said, because we want to make Mayapur famous also, along with Lord Chaitanya, and this will make it, make the word Mayapur out into the public, he said, all right, that Mayapur, but he would use them interchangeably. But yeah, it was Mayapur Chandradoya Mandir. So in talking about the big temple, Prabhupada said again and again, I want a big dome. Big, and he'd hold his hand up like that. Big dome. And he had been to, that must have been 1976, when he had been to Washington for the bicentennial, and he saw the Washington the United States Capitol building, and he loved that big, that's what he wanted, a big dome. It's so imposing. No one will listen to me. I feel like Cassandra, No one, he, again and again and again, a big dome. But now they don't have a big dome. It's the wrong kind of architecture, I think. But, I don't have any real say, but I can state my case anyway, because it is what Prabhupada told me. Prabhupada instructed me a lot about Mayapur. And he wanted escalators, moving stairways. What do you call escalator? Yes, escalator, going up to different levels with the exhibits. That he definitely wanted, and he wanted one big dome. And the universe, it's not such a complicated thing. The way he described it, he said the universe should be hanging like a chandelier from the middle of the big dome. And all the specifics of what life is like on the different planets and the hellish planets and the heavenly planets and Vaikuntha and Golok, that should all be on exhibits going up on the side of the building with the moving stairways, with the escalators. But the main temple itself, it should be covered by one big dome. That's what he wanted.
I was on a morning walk, a couple here in L.A. In 76, I think it was, we had the appearance of the Gopi Baba Club, unquote. And I was on a morning walk just at that time. Prabhupada was, especially he quoted one verse again and again, Deha smriti nahi jar samsar bandhan kahantar. This verse is from the CC and also quoted by Narottam Das in one song. Narottam changed it a little bit, but basically means Deha Smriti, remembrance of the body. Where is that remembrance? For one who is doesn't remember the body, then samsara is finished. So he was saying that how could anyone think that they could be absorbed in this gopi bhava and still be aware of their body? He said, is it artificial platform? He was really...
I must have fallen into Maya. Srila Prabhupada's answer at that point, he says, you're always in Maya. Sometimes you fall into Krishna. I like that one. That's a good one.
Prabhupada was telling about there was one yogi. So the mouse came, and he complained to the yogi that this cat is always bothering me. So yogi said, what do you want? He said, I want to become a cat, and the cat won't bother me. So yogi waved his hand, and he became a cat. Then later he came back, and yogi said, now what's the matter? He said, you want something? He said, yes, I want to become a dog. Now this dog is always chasing me and bothering me, so I want to become a dog. He said, oh, you want to become a dog? All right, you become a dog. So he became a dog. So then after a while he came back to the yogi, and yogi said, now you want something? He said, yes, now this tiger is bothering me. I want to become a tiger. He said, oh, you want to become tiger? All right, now you become a tiger. So when he became tiger, then he was looking at that yogi with longing in his eyes. And yogi said, oh, you want to eat me? And tiger shook his head, yes. So Prabhupada said, then yogi said, Punar Mushika Bhava, again become a mouse. So we all just burst out laughing, but Prabhupada, was very, he meant it to be serious. I mean, later we understood, because we became puffed up with our position and so many things, and failed to realize that Prabhupada was actually the real power behind us. So Prabhupada had a very serious message that he wanted us to understand, that don't become big and think that now I'm very big, I can take over my spiritual master's position. So he just looked at me and said, serious, try to understand, don't laugh.
They were doing kirtan in the temple at Mayapur. It was during a festival. And they were saying, what was the tune they used? Because it lent itself to saying Gadadhar. Sri Gadadhar, Sriva, but it wasn't that melody. It was one of those newer melodies. Prabhupada called me in and he said, they're singing Gadadhar. He said, it is Gadadhar. But no one ever listened to me. I told everyone, but they all continued to just chant Gadadhar because it was more syncopated, I guess, for the melody. But melody shouldn't take precedence over the name.
I remember the first time I ever saw Srila Prabhupada was this tiny little photograph on their altar in their hotel room. And it was the one that Guru Das took in London with the chadar mounted on the wall behind Srila Prabhupada, Bhagavatams on one side, and on the other side, Srila Prabhupada's hand in his bead bag, chanting. Very sober expression. I looked at the photograph and I couldn't understand it. I said, why is he so sober? Why is he so serious? Well, when I met Guru Das about a year later, or 6 months later, I asked him about that. I saw the photograph. He said, oh, I took that photograph. I said, why is he so... He said, I thought Krishna consciousness was a happy thing. Why is he so serious? Guru Das said that he had shown these photos. This was one of many that he had taken that day to Srila Prabhupada and asked the same question. And Prabhupada's answer was, you're unable to recognize ecstasy. Oh, I've got a long way to go too.
Well, the first time Seti told me all this himself, that he saw Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was in the car with Mahadevya in Bombay. And then Seti had just had a car accident, he had a big thing on his neck, and the doctor said he had to have it for 6 months. So then he was just introduced to Prabhupada. He said, this is Prabhupada, this is Mr. Seti. So he looked at Seti and he said, why do you have this on your neck? And he said, oh, the doctor said I need it for six months. He said, take it off, you don't need it. So Seti was thinking, what is this? How's this guy telling me to take this off? Doctors told me to wear it for 6 months. He took it off and he didn't need it. He was perfectly all right. Another one he told me was that his father was sick in Chandigarh. Seti was in Bombay, so he got a telegram. You must come immediately. He's very serious. In India they say that, serious. So he told Prabhupada, he said, Prabhupada, I'm going to Chandigarh. My father's very sick, serious. Prabhupada looked at him and said, he's not serious. He said, no, I just got a telegram. He said, he'll meet you at the bus station. So Seti didn't take it that seriously. He just jumped a train, then he had to take a bus. When he got to the bus station, his father was there. He was perfectly all right. But a big thing was, one time, Mrs. Nair came about 3 days before Mr. Nair, the famous rascal, tried to cheat Prabhupada. Mrs. Nair wasn't so bad. She came with her attorney to Seti's house. And she actually was respectful. And Prabhupada was talking to her and said, why is your husband so greedy? He only has a few days to live. So the man was dead in 3 days. You don't want to offend Prabhupada too much.
Well, a few years later, there was a lot of difficulty with Prabhupada's wife and his daughter. They were having some real problem in the house that they lived in, which was her father's house down there on Mahatma Gandhi Road. There was some, like, really, you know how the Bengali people get really family, like practically fratricidal wars, you know, where they divide the houses in half right through the bathroom, you know, they're really crazy in that way. So the family, his wife's family was giving them a lot of, and they were frightened. And his son, Vrindavan Chandra, had told Prabhupada that. So Prabhupada called Tamal and I in and asked us to go to Calcutta to speak to his wife and his daughter and tell them that he wanted them to come out to Mayapur and he would care for them. They could live there and everything. And forget who it was. It wasn't me, and I don't think it was Tamal, but someone said, maybe it was Jai Pataka, I'm not sure. Prabhupada, you're, you know, an international famous person. Won't people criticize that the sannyasi is living, you know, his wife and family are living in the same... Prabhupada said, that does not matter. He said, in an emergency, that transcends everything. That transcends all these sannyas things. He said, it's an emergency.
I asked him one time, this was at Bhaktivedanta Manor, what did he think about therapy, psychiatry? And he said he didn't hold out a lot of hope for it, but that he had sent his son, one of his sons, to a psychiatrist. He said his son had gone off to college and came back, and he wasn't right in his head. And at the time in Calcutta, he said the hospital had two halves. One was the Indian side, and the other was the British side. And the British side had the better doctors, more expensive. And but he took the trouble and expense of sending his son to the psychiatrist in the British side of the hospital. And he said actually he came back better for a time. But then he went away and I never saw him again.
There was a time we went to the artist here in LA, and we asked him some questions about Lord Chaitanya, and did he have a Sika? Did he not have a Sika? What is one of the questions? He said no, he didn't have one, but we should paint with a Sika, and that he didn't have Brahmin thread, but we should also paint the Brahmin thread. And apparently, I don't even know if he wore saffron. He might have worn a white dhoti, but we paint him with a saffron dhoti. But another thing he said was, braid is for a woman. braid is for women, he said. We asked him if we paint a Sika with a braid. He said, braid is for women. We asked him how long we should work on the paintings, you know, that we felt we didn't have time. He said, he told a story about the woman, girl was dressing for the ball, and she missed the ball. He said, so he didn't want us to work too long on things.
There was a big outdoor soiree at Bhaktivedanta Manor in '73, I believe, that at the time a young devotee named Jai Hari had organized. Very fancy invitations, big stage, rock band. You remember this? All the royalty and high society of outer London had been invited to this event, and invitations had been delivered by chauffeured limo, and it's like ridiculous expense. And there were outdoor lights, and the whole thing was set up as an evening soiree. And I guess the idea was we had Bhaktivedanta Manor, very beautiful facility. Why not get the people who might appreciate that kind of style to come in? A handful of people showed up, looked, went away. It ended up being a lot of rock and roll on stage with a few devotees kind of standing around befuddled, wondering how to respond to all this. So I was up in Srila Prabhupada's room, and we were just sitting there, I think, chanting. The rock and roll was going on in the background out his window, and I said, Srila Prabhupada, what do you think about all this? I mean, is this okay with you? And he stood up and went to the window and looked down, and kind of his head went back and forth once or twice like that. And he said, well, if the end result is that they chant Hare Krishna, then it's all right. I said, but I don't understand something. You closed down the traveling roadshow. At the time, there had been a bus that had gone around that set up a show with music and guitars and told a story in dramatic form, a kind of a musical piece. And Prabhupada said, no, that was different. He said, I closed that because it wasn't being managed well. People were not maintaining their spiritual service. I said, but that doesn't mean that we will not use something if it is being done in Krishna's service. So he made that distinction.
We'd take the walks in the morning, and Prabhupada would say, oh, I want, build that there and do this and do that. And I would always say, Prabhupada, where's the money? Where's the money coming from? And it's the only time he ever raised his voice to me, even though he probably should have a lot more. But that one time he said, why you are always worried about money? Why you are always worried about money? You do not think Krishna will provide? Then later in the morning, he called me into his room, and Tamal was there with Gargamuni. And he said, our Bhavananda. He would always call me our Bhavananda. He is always worrying about money. Now, I want you to see that he never has to worry about money again. Whatever he wants, you give him so he can develop this Mayapur. Tamal and Gargamuni. He nailed them. He said he should not have to worry.
We were walking towards what was once the Goshala there at the front of the property where the gate is in Mayapur, and there was a cow coming toward us. So I kind of glanced at it as my usual stupor, and suddenly Prabhupada lifted his cane and pointed it straight toward the cow, and he quoted the Chanakya Shlok that Nadinam Nakinam Chaiva Shringinyam. It means that one should be wary of animals that have horns and claws like that, because the cow has horns. And we didn't know at that time Prabhupada had been gored by a cow. So he's definitely concerned. But it sticks out in your head, in your mind. On another walk, he was told by Jai Pitaka that some of the Bengalis were concerned. One had a daughter, wanted her married, and he had no money for dowry. So Prabhupada said, and I don't remember whether it was 100 rupees or 500 rupees, but it was definitely not much. He said, yes, we can provide 100 rupees or 500 rupees. Even 500 rupees would be nothing for a dowry. He said, Prabhupada said, she may marry within ISKCON or out, I do not mind, I do not care. As long as she was married, that was the main idea.
I think this was in Rome. You know, Jim was not feeling very well, and and he was kind of complaining about not being able to get everything done. And I went in to see Srila Prabhupada. He looked at me and said, you know, when I travel by plane, I have problems in my knees from the pressure, but I don't talk about it.
In Mayapur in 70, must have been 77. You know, Rameshwar was in charge of BTG, and so there was some complaints about the way he was doing it. And so I knew about it, Anyway, he came late to the festival. And I was up getting a job. He walked in, anyway, that's another story. He asked me, so there's some complaints, in his chest out as usual. So, and I said, yeah, they say they're going to kick you off BTG. You know, I just kind of like leveled at him like that. He very indignantly. Next thing I knew, I don't know how it ended up, but I was up there. Prabhupada was getting a massage. It was Hari Shari. And he had his head down. And Rameshwar was there, and I was peeking as usual, and Prabhupada was holding up one of the magazines, and he said, why there's no Krishna painting in here? There wasn't enough Krishna painting. He was complaining. So and I personally know that Rameshwar was very pleased with that magazine. In fact, he thought it was that particular illustration was, I think it's a scientist pouring it into a beaker, but I told him, I said, it looks like a scientist creating the universe. I don't think this is good. He said, this is the best illustration we've ever done. This was back in LA, and now we're back in Mayapur. And Prabhupada's complaining about that very magazine. So Rameshwar said, I didn't know anything about this, Prabhupada. I wasn't there when they did this. And Prabhupada wasn't even looking up at him. He was literally just had his head down, and he was getting a massage. And so Prabhupada said, I am sending Satsarup. He will bring back the old-fashioned Krishna consciousness. And Rameshwar was very upset. But he wanted to be in charge, real bad. He said, but Prabhupada, he said, Prabhupada didn't look at him. He just, remember, he put his hand like this. He said, you speak with the GBC. And that was that.
Kartikeya was cooking for Prabhupada. And one day Govindadasi came and she brought some wheat germ. And Kartikeya saw this wheat germ. He said, next time Prabhupada asks for halava, I'm going to make it with wheat germ instead of with semolina, with the farina. And so one day it rained. And he said Prabhupada used to like to take halava on rainy days because it, gave him lots of warmth. So he asked Kartikeya to make this halava. So Kartikeya went in the kitchen, and then he was thinking that, oh, Prabhupada's going to be so pleased. I'm going to make this halava with wheat germ. He's going to like this so much. He was just meditating like that, how much Prabhupada was going to like this. And so he offered it to the deities, and he brought it into Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada looked at the bowl. He said, what is this? Halava means farina. And then with his left hand, which is very heavy, when you reject something with left hand, that's really rejection. So take it away. So Kartikeya, he was just, his whole heart was like, that, and he was a very sensitive fellow, and his whole heart was that Prabhupada's going to be so pleased. So he was just like completely devastated. And he went into the temple room and he sat down in front of the picture of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And he began to pray that, actually, I was just trying to please your spiritual son, and now he's so upset with me, I don't know what to do. And he was just like crying, because he's a very sensitive fellow. He said, but actually, I was just trying to please your spiritual son. Suddenly he heard Prabhupada's voice, Kartikeya? Kartikeya? And he ran into Prabhupada's room. He said, bring that halava. So he brought him a bowl of halava. Prabhupada ate. He said, bring more. In this way, Prabhupada finished off the whole pot of halava. So Prabhupada always told us, that the grandfather is more merciful than the father. So young devotees should not feel that, well, I didn't get any association with Prabhupada, I didn't, get to see Prabhupada. Prabhupada is your grandfather, spiritual master. And he's more, to us, he's, I sometimes feel he's chastising me because I'm just not doing as much service as I could. But for all of the young devotees, Prabhupada is, he's already so merciful. We can just imagine the grandfather, spiritual master, is more merciful. So you've got Prabhupada as your grandfather, spiritual master. And he's more merciful.
When we started giving out khichdi, and then, we built that big hall, prasadam hall, and some of his godbrothers were criticizing him. You're feeding khichdi on Lord Chaitanya's appearance day to the pilgrims. And Prabhupada said, if I don't feed them, right, you're supposed to fast all day, right? So they were all complaining because we're feeding all the pilgrims. He said, if I don't feed them, they'll go up to the tea stall and eat fish, and they're going to eat anyway, so they might as well eat prasadam on our land. He said, we're not eating, but you can't expect them to fast, but we can't eat. They're so picky. But Prabhupada never gave in. He always had the correct answer. If I don't feed them, they're going to eat fish. So we might as well feed them. But they had to eat everything there. He didn't want all the village people coming and taking the khichdi in little containers and going home. He said, because they'll mix it with fish, and he said nothing will be accomplished.
Once I was in Prabhupada's quarters, and he was all very weak then. A card arrived from Bali, from Allen Ginsberg, and in the card, Tamal Krishna read it to him that Allen Ginsberg said, "I am in Bali practicing non-theistic Buddhism," and Buddhism is pretty non-theistic, as it, anyway. But I heard of your, that you weren't so well, so I'm very concerned like that. So Prabhupada said in a very faint voice, he said, you can write to him, tell him to pray to his non-theistic deity for my improved health. A non-theistic deity. As far as Prabhupada is concerned, you've always got to have a deity, whatever you're doing. It's something you have to relate to. Is impersonal, is out of the question.
I was massaging Prabhupada, and Gargamuni Maharaj came in to see him, and Prabhupada said, have you seen how Bhavananda is keeping a dead man alive? He said, you should watch how he's massaging. He's keeping a dead man alive. He said, practically speaking, I should be dead, but he is keeping me alive. So Gargamuni was talking about different things with Srila Prabhupada, and he mentioned that they really need me in Mayapur. And he said that, and then they went on to other things. Then Gargamuni Maharaj left. By that time, because with Prabhupada, he would sit, and you'd start on his head, and you go down his body, and you end at his feet. I was massaging his legs, and Prabhupada said, this is the dilemma. He said, whether I should continue to keep you here as my body servant. And he said, practically speaking, no one has ever, and I'm not saying this like for my own aggrandizement, he said, no one has served Vishnupad as you have. Right? And by this time, I was at his feet. And I knew what was coming. And I started to cry. And he said, whether my own service, bodily service, is more important than the preaching. He said, that is my dilemma. He said, but I think you must return to Mayapur. And I was crying, and I was massaging his feet, and my tears were falling on his feet, but I just couldn't help it. And I thought, wow, this is really extraordinary. Here I am massaging Prabhupada's feet with mustard oil and my tears, right? And I just was really crying. And I looked up, and Prabhupada was also crying. I said, no, he said, it must be. You must go back. He said, Mayapur is our preaching.
I remember when I first came to Los Angeles, that time Prabhupada said Los Angeles is a training center, and it was snowing in Boulder anyway, and they didn't know what to do with me, although I was perfectly happy to sit and read Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam all day long. But they figured I would fall into Maya, so they sent me to LA to get trained up. And that time I think Dayananda might have been the temple president or something, that he came to the airport and picked me up and brought me back to the temple. And the first devotee I ran into was a devotee named Mahapurush. And he began to tell me a story. I just walked in the door and he started telling me the story way back on 26 2nd Avenue, that he used to go there and take prasadam, because every day, everybody would come and they'd sit in Swamiji's apartment and he would serve out, rice dal chapatis and everything to everyone. And one day he stayed a little late. Everybody had sort of gotten up and left, and he stayed a little late. And he suddenly noticed that there was only 2 people in the room, and that there was all these dirty pots. And he began to think, well, somehow these dirty pots get cleaned every day. And I don't see anybody else around. There's only one other person in this room, and I'm usually not here. So there's only one other person in this room who could be doing this. So he said, well, it's not proper, so he began to pick up the pots. At that moment, Prabhupada smiled, and he said, I was just praying to Krishna to please send someone to help me. So the amazing thing was, we know that the real perfection of, if we want to get Mahaprabhu's mercy, then he's told us, Trinadapi sunichena charodapi sehishna manina manadena kirtaniya sadahari. And nobody has realized the purport of that verse like Srila Prabhupada. Because he could have stayed in any Gaudiya mat. They all loved him. They knew that Abai Babu sang sweet kirtans, he lectured wonderfully, he wrote wonderful articles. He could have stayed anywhere, and you go in any Gaudiya mat, you see any old sannyasi, but they just, they have very nice etiquette, and they wait on them hand and foot. He wouldn't have to do anything, but to speak of wash a pot, no cooking, no nothing, everything. He could have lived a very comfortable life in Vrindavan. Instead, here he was washing the pots for these hippies. I mean, we were like the most degraded class of persons. And Prabhupada, he had realized the purport like nobody. I mean, we couldn't even begin to imagine. Couldn't even think of doing the same thing ourselves nowadays. But Prabhupada was cooking, and he was cleaning up after people like us, just out of his, Prabhupada's humility and compassion is unparalleled. There's no one like Prabhupada, and there'll never be anyone like Prabhupada.
This is one that really doesn't make me feel good, but I have to tell you, when near the end, maybe it was 3 or 4 days before he passed away, I was sitting in the room with him. It was late at night. I was sitting in a chair, and the bed was there, and Prabhupada's. And his eyes, he wasn't able to see very clearly at that point. His eyes were rheumy, and his vision couldn't see very well. And he was resting, and I was just sitting in the chair, and there was a dim light on. And he said, "Who is there?" I said, "It's Bhavananda, Prabhupada." He said, "Oh, Bhavananda, don't ever leave me. Stay with me forever." How do you think that makes me feel? Jeez. I think about that a lot. It was so extraordinary. Don't ever leave me. Stay with me forever. Je anilo prema dana
fortune